Are you looking to make your first 3D Gaussian splat scene and you don't know where to get started? Well, I'm here to show you where to get started with Gaussian splatting in 2025. There's a lot of different things you can do, a lot of different ways you can get started, but this is the right way to start so you will learn how step by step to make a good Gaussian splatting scene, and then you can move on to the more advanced tips. So here is a really interesting scene with Gaussian splatting. And you might be looking at it and thinking, well, what is this? Is it a mesh? Is it a point cloud? You don't know what it is. Is it a video? Well, first we're going to start off with just talking about what you're looking at and how they're made, just so you have an understanding of what we're doing here. So a Gaussian splat is basically, think of it as a point cloud, but each point is really kind of shaped like a football, or it could be squashed more like a round orb, or stretched out real thin, like a really spiky spike. But it really is just an ellipsoid shape. And it has what's called a Gaussian distributed density. That also means that if you look at the edges of it, it kind of feathers out the density of the coloring and how dense it is. So in the middle, you're gonna have lots of color. It's gonna be really bright. And at the edges, you're gonna barely be able to see it. And so when you overlap a lot of these, you get this very interesting looking scene. And lastly, they have this view dependency. So if I look at one of these orbs, and you're going to look at millions of them at a time, and I look at from one direction, one of these might appear to be blue, like in water. But then if I change the direction in which I'm looking at that same point, it might be white. Think of reflections of water. It doesn't look the same from each direction. So it's view dependent. And that's really important. It'll get us these lifelike scenes like this one I'm showing right here. So as we think about this, it's really just this really dense, complex point cloud. So how is this made? How are these all put together to make your scene? Well, first you take imagery. And in this example, I'm going to use a telecom tower because it's a really easy thing to grasp. And I have all this overlapping imagery. I'm going to see all sides of this tower. And then what I need is a point cloud and camera poses. And a lot of this information, you don't have to actually make the point cloud and camera poses on your own. That's what the software will do for you. So you don't have to worry about it, but that's what's happening in the background. And it's going to take these camera poses, and it's going to take all these shapes in the scene and take these ellipsoids and just take all those points in a point cloud and say each of those points become one of those splats, one of those ellipsoids, and start to try to make shapes like you see in the scene. So I saw this awesome tower and of all these shapes, and over time it's going to go through what's called iterations, and it's going to take each one of these little shapes and it's either going to clone and make more points to try to fill up this area or this shape, or it's going to basically split like a large one and start to evolve into these shapes. And let's see what that looks like. That's really hard to grasp when I talk about it. But if I move on, you know what you got here is like, here's the antenna array on that telecom tower. And it might start out with a really, we start with a point cloud. And it says all these points start out as an ellipsoid. And then they start to grow, they morph, they split, they become more, and they start to fill that up. And this is only 10 iterations. So if I take this further, after 100 iterations, you can see I got this like really large orbs. I got these smaller ones, and they're trying to recreate the scene. As I said, that at the center, they're really sharp and they have a lot of color, and you get further out, they get fuzzier, and you can see that fuzziness everywhere. But if I move in a little bit further, we got 1,000 iterations. So now the scene's starting to make sense because our splats have doubled. Now we're making up the scene with 400,000 plus splats. And now I can see, okay, that's a car I see a van, I see the telecom tower, but again, it doesn't look great. So what we do is the software will loop through all the images and reference each image one by one through loops, and then again, try to evolve to create more splats. And so now here we go. We're already at 3,000 iterations. In this example, we're at 2.6 million splats. And you can see that on the right, here's all your splats. And on the left, things are really coming into clarity. And when you got a lot of overlapping images, a lot of reference, things are looking good. On the fringes, not so much. But you can see that it's starting to learn what the scene looks like and create this hyper-realistic model. Now we're at 7,000 iterations. Things are looking really good, 5.3 million splats. Moving along to 15,000 iterations. Now we're getting into where a lot of the software really starts to shine, and you're getting these fine details like these little cables and the grass and everything starting to really pop up and look really, really realistic. But in the background, all it is these ellipsoids. And when they're overlapped in this Gaussian density, they look like this. They look like a photo. And so if I take it out to 30,000 iterations and almost 8 million splats, it pretty much looks like a photo. At the edges here where we have very little information, things start to look not that great, but overall, you could almost fool someone. So if I show you the ground truth comparison, so on the left, we have the splats. On the right, we have what's called the ground truth, which is just the image from where that was taken. You can see we've reproduced this whole scene, and in some areas, it's almost identical. And maybe in this background, we didn't get too many images back there, so it does its best. And then you get this really good scene. So basically what you're looking at is an optical illusion that is basically a fancy point cloud, if you want to think about it that way. And here you go. Here it is in 3D where it's moving. You get all this great information on that telecom tower, something that you really couldn't easily do in meshes. You get this parallax movement in the background. So it looks like 3D. And this is a really basic explanation of what's really happening here. There's a rasterizing to view it. There's all these other things. But as far as a beginner, all you really need to know is that we're just trying to create the scene as it was visualized in the camera pictures you've taken. So if you keep that in mind as I go through this tutorial, it's all about getting good pictures and trying to reproduce it. Okay, so now you're starting on your journey. You want to make your first one. You got to think about what hardware I need. And of course, you need a camera because this is a camera-based technology that takes images and makes novel images. So basically, we're taking a view and we're going to recreate the scene from views you've never seen. That's how I was able to move around in 3D. So you need a camera. And there's basically 5 main camera categories I think about when talking about this. But if you're getting started, I really want you to focus on the iPhone first. Master the smartphone, the Samsung phone, whatever you have in your pocket, that is where you should start. Don't worry about anything else. Why? You already have one. Also, they're really easy to use. You don't have to think about what lens there is to put on them. You already have cameras built in. It can support third-party apps, which I'll talk about. So you don't even need hardware beyond the smartphone. You could do this whole thing with just a smartphone. It's easy to get everything in focus. These are all geared to get hyper-focused images. What that means is you can get the person or object in the front really sharp, and the background is all going to be sharp, because when you're recreating these scenes, if you think about it, you want everything to be in focus because you want the background to be in focus, you want the foreground to be in focus. And then you can always add depth of field later using special plugins. But if you don't get it in focus with the picture at the start, you're not going to be able to reproduce a good representation of those objects in the background or in the foreground if they're out of focus. So start here. Master this camera first before you do anything else. Drones, I'd say if you do have a drone and you know what you're doing and you're like a really skilled drone pilot, I would say you can also start here, but I would still suggest the iPhone first. But you have this gimbal on there, so you're going to get this really smooth images. Stay away from any like detachable payloads with a zoom. You basically just want these, like, I call them prosumer, or not toy drones, but these drones that have a really good camera that don't zoom in and out or anything like that, because you don't want to deal with, if you zoom, you might have some big problems down the road. But these are great. And then use the flight modes. There's these orbit modes. You have all these different modes to get the right imagery, and that makes everything all smooth. You don't have to do any like jerking or panning. And that's really what you want, because when it comes to flying a drone, it's all about getting that smooth images, nothing shaky. And so you can get really good photos here or video. Just, I would suggest, if you've never used a drone, don't go buy one to learn Gaussian splatting either. Figure out your smartphone first. So let's talk about capture. So now you have the right hardware. Now you got to think about, how am I going to capture the images to get these really cool outputs like this one. Okay, so when you're walking around and you're capturing, you want to think about capturing with your feet, not with your arms. What does that mean? That means if you're capturing a room, an object, you want to be walking around it and getting different viewpoints. You do not want to stand in place and move that camera around. If you do that, everything's going to fall apart very quickly. So capture with your feet, walk to different viewpoints. Do not stay still. And then along with that, for a room, if you just want to get started, you can just walk a circle and you can get these really great captures like this one in the subway. It's amazing what you can get just walking a circle and varying your angles. So you want to do multiple loops. So I'm going to walk around this room at 3 different heights. When I say that, you want to hold the camera high, you want to hold the camera low. And as you do that, you want to be like up high looking down. You want to be in the middle looking straight across and low looking up. So you've got different angles and perspectives on the room, and just walk these loops. This is the easiest thing to master. Once you've got this down, we'll get into more advanced walking paths, but I want to make sure you get this figured out before you move along. And then again, with like objects, as you can see with like, this is an apple crate. You just want to be moving that camera up and walking in circles, and you want to be getting different viewpoints. So when you want to look at it later, if you don't have a viewpoint anywhere near where you want to look, like straight down on this apple crate, then you won't have good data to look at it. You're going to have to look down, or you want to be able to move around. Same with this tower I did. I basically did a spiral around it, and I had the camera pointed down, so I was able to get the ground around it and get this nice looking capture. So again, it's all about just doing loops at different heights and varying the perspective that you got. And then start with video. That might sound silly because you're thinking, well, video is not the sharpest. That's fine. I would rather you get a video and then extract images from a video, which is really thousands of images, and not worry about like how often to take a photo, which I'll get into in a different video. But for this, if you're not capturing enough images or enough overlap between them, everything falls apart. So if you capture a video, a lot of this software will just optimize your video and say, okay, I'll grab the right frames and I'll do the best I can with the video. And so I always say start with a video. And you can take 4K, you can take 1080p. Don't go get an 8K video or raw video you can work with, but at the start, to start out with like 4K. You might even need to downsample that as well, depending on what hardware you have. And then sharpness is key. So as you think about it, you want these well-lit rooms. You want everything to be sharp, because if it's not sharp, it's going to come out fuzzy in the end. As we were going through that how these things are made, it was showing you that it's going to take a reference image and it's going to say, okay, reproduce what this image looks like as a Gaussian splat. Well, if you give me a not sharp, fuzzy image, it's going to say that scene's supposed to look fuzzy from this viewpoint, and that's not great. So avoid bokeh in your background. We went over that. You want to make sure everything's all in focus, because if it's bokeh, it's not going to work. Moving objects, again, if something's moving through the scene, it's just going to be these weird streaks, because it's not going to be in every image as you're looking at the scene. You want to be further back. We want to reproduce a scene. Unless you're trying to make a splat of just a small object, you want to capture some context. So don't get super close to what you're trying to capture. I'd rather you shoot wide and crop in than shoot too close. And then exposure. Exposure is like one of the number one reasons I see people get a bad result. Why is that? It's because they typically be walking around and then all of a sudden the sky's overexposed and it's all white. And the next one is blue, or you might have parts blown out. And when it's doing that, the technology will say, I don't know where the surfaces are. I don't know how far back this is. I'm going to put a bunch of what they're called floaters, like bad splats all over the scene when it doesn't know where it is. So you want to try to keep it like an even exposure, keep things well exposed. And that's easy if you can light up a room really well, not be pointing your camera straight into the sunlight, things like that. So the last thing is software. I have it grouped into 3 different categories. We have these kind of like app and website based ones. I have 4 symbols. They're not all of them. We have Scaniverse, Curie Engine, Polycam, and Luma. I will touch on each of those a little bit in the next slide, but those are great to start out with. I say everyone should start with Scaniverse, because you get the result right on the app. And that's really, really nice, because then you can start to learn what works and what doesn't without actually having to upload it anywhere. Just you get instant feedback. And then you have Postshot. Postshot is the only kind of commercial executable app out there right now for making these. They run on Windows, so we'll go into that. But again, that's more for like a little bit more than just casual having fun. I'm a hobbyist, or I want to make some cool After Effects thing. That might be where you start. Again, I do advocate for starting with an iPhone or Android-based app and learning there first. And then lastly, we have these not necessarily open source, but these code-based Nerf Studio and the original 3D Gaussian Splat code base. Those are great if you're a creator, but also if you're a developer and you want to build something around this, you're going to want to start there. That's where you can integrate things into your own products and build from there. But again, learn the basics using Scaniverse or Polycam or whatever you want before you start trying to compile code and working with that. Okay, guys, at this point, I am in the middle of editing, hence why it's different in my room. However, I realized that I didn't make it clear that I wasn't going to tell you exactly how to make one of these using these software. But the reason why I didn't is because that would be really hard to do in one guide, because every software works differently. I just want to say, if you want to use one of these software, just go download the app, go download the code, follow the instructions. Postshot, it's like drag, drop, and go. They all have really good instructions, easy to learn. The apps, a lot of them are self-guided. It shouldn't be that difficult if you follow the tips I talked about. So that's where it is. I'm going to jump now into just describing the pros and cons of each one of these apps so you know which way to go. And from there, you should be on your way. I also do have a guide on 3DGS, which is the Nrea code that is got over 200,000 views. And that is the guide I would follow for that one, which is the most difficult of all of these. So anyways, back to the video. And again, if you're liking it, please subscribe. And also, yes, that cat is in the same spot every single video. Talking about each of these little software categories a little bit more, we have Scaniverse, which is my favorite for just learning because it works on iPhone and it works on Android and it processes your data right on the phone. And you're not going to get the highest quality result ever, but you will learn what works and what doesn't real fast. Some of the pros to it, again, right on the phone. Most of these have some free tier, and they have an interactive way to share your results. So I'm able to like send it to someone, they can look at it, you can embed them on your website, and that's very easy and a great tool for doing that. And some even have some editing tools. So I'm able to like crop the scene down or whatever I want to do with it. But the biggest con to all this is all your data is not yours. It all ends up in the cloud somewhere, except for Scaniverse, which might stay on your phone. But if you upload that data, now someone else can have it. So if you're trying to do this for work or something like that, think about the fact that you don't actually store all that data in-house. And that could be an issue later on. And then also they cap the results. Everything's kind of optimized for mobile, make sure everything looks good and it works really fast. But that's not necessarily what you want. If you want something for, let's say, you're a VFX guy and you want to do something for a commercial, you want the best quality, you're going to want to use a different option. Okay, so then there's Postshot. So Postshot's an interesting software. It's in beta. So if I go with cons first, it does have bugs from time to time. But that being said, it's super easy to install. Just one caveat there is that you need to have Windows and you have to have a really nice graphics card. So I say NVIDIA RTX 2060. They actually have a little bit more requirements on their website. I ideally want you to have, if you could, 10 gigabytes of video RAM and a RTX 3000 series or newer. Things take longer on the older cards and kind of limits how much videos or images you can use. So if you don't have a lot of RAM, you might only get a few hundred images versus if you have a lot of RAM, you might be able to put a few thousand images into the software and process it. Some other big pros here, again, you just download the executable, not hard to set up. It's got a bunch of controls over your processing, so you can start to learn what makes things different. I do want to point out, if you don't have a good capture, no software will make your capture look better. It's garbage in, it's garbage out. They also have a plugin for After Effects and I think Unreal Engine. And so there's these just different things you can do to edit and display and look at these. So this is something, if you're a creator and you want to get really serious and you have the right hardware, as soon as you master the app, move on to this. And the last one is this kind of code-based software. So Nerve Studio and the original 3DGS project, which is by Inria. I will link in this description all these different software you can get, but I do have a guide on both of these. It requires the same hardware as PostShot, except for you can use Linux, which is great if you're in that developer community. And it's open source for Nerve Studio, so you can start to really integrate it in your products. And same with the original 3DGS code, they will grant you a license if you reach out. And I don't know how much it costs, but again, you can use that to build a product around, and as opposed to the other ones, which are more freestanding. This software has a really thriving developer community on GitHub, and they all have a really good Discord community as well. So you can always jump on that and learn a lot. So it does have a big barrier of entry of learning how it works. But again, there's a community behind it. You can learn real quickly. And I know you can master this if you really work at it. And then lastly, there's these cool animation tools that they have for these. And they have these viewers you can modify. And you get the latest development. So a lot of people who are working on the latest code, things like that, they're going to throw it in 3D. And they're going to throw it in Nerve Studio first for people to learn. And they're going to build it on that open source software. So you always have like the latest if you're using Nerve Studio. So there you have it. If you're new to 3D Gaussian splatting, I will be putting out one video per week or more about how to get the best out of this technology. I'll be talking about capture tips. I'll be talking about why things go wrong. I'll be explaining the technology behind this a little bit more in detail. So if you're at this point, you got to the end of the video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can get all these latest developments. And I will be even going into how to compile the code for Nerve Studio, things like that, if you really want to dive into that minutia. I hope you liked this video and learned something new, and I hope you set out on the right journey for 3D Gaussian splatting. I'll see you in the next video.